Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Drop the Mic Mondays. We know that there are so many places that you could be, but we're super excited that you can be with us here today. My name is Natasha. I am the organizing director at About Face Veterans Against the War. And, listen, for all of those who are in the audience who either understand what the military industrial complex is, engage with us in the chat as we have today's conversations. We'll do this weekly. We'll have different guests and bring them on to talk about, really what type of society do we want to exist? Do we believe can happen? And so that this is why we wanted to really create this space to talk about the military industrial complex. And so, what we really want to do is to break down militarism, colonialism, imperialism, racism, systemic, structural, and institution oppression wherever it exists. And so, our guests will include activists, artists, experts from, the grassroots level, and who are doing work in their communities across the movement. And so we really think that it's important to have these conversations, particularly as we're seeing the defense budget projected to increase you know overwhelmingly from where it is, where it should be, and while we see social, needs not being met in our country. So we really want to have space to have conversation with our guests. And again, so if you're here with us, I'd love for you to do just one thing, or actually two. Engage with us in the chat if you have questions, reflections, share some of the work that you're doing. And then also grab this link, share it across your social media, and invite friends and colleagues and comrades to join us in this space. We're here today after the 54th and I would say year after Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to go and listen to his words again, where he talks about the three evils of society, which is racism, which is exploitation of economics, and militarism. And hear those words and really help it become a part of the organizing that you may do, the conversations that you might have, whether it's in a coffee shop, your community, or building power, shifting the power structures really to people-centered, and definitely for what we need in this moment. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Shauna, I want to bring you on. Please do a brief introduction and then let's get into the conversation.
Hey, everybody, it's Shauna Foster. I'm the co-director with About Face, Veterans Against the War. Been part of this organization since 2006, and I'm so glad that you're listening to us today. Absolutely right on, Natasha, today being April 4th, 53rd year in observance after MLK, left us way too early. And the most moving of his speeches were beyond Vietnam, where he calls the triplets of evil, racism, poverty, and militarism. That's the first time I ever read that word, was militarism, was in his Beyond Vietnam speech. So if you want to know what About Face is all about, go read Beyond Militarism, because that is exactly what we are organizing on today against those triplets of evil and how they intersect and just perpetuate oppressions. Another thing I wanted to give a shout out to is the Trans Day of Visibility was last week. So we're so glad that trans folks are with us. We're so proud of you. And I wanted to give a shout out to our Demilitarized You that's coming up on these same Vets About Face channels on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. If you come to our Demilitarized You, you will hear from our own veteran, Shiloh, and Dean Spade talking about why trans people serve in the military, what happened that made it, that went from don't task, don't tell to trans people openly serving in the military, and all the intersections of, is representation actually the same thing as liberation? And is that what trans people want? So come and check out our Demilitarized You on these same channels to be able to learn more about that. And happy Trans Day of Visibility. We're so glad for trans people to be with us and to be part of our communities. So today I wanted to get into it with my buddy Ramon. He works at Grassroots Global Justice. I first met Ramon back in, oh my gosh, I don't know, was it like 2013, 2014, when he was a board member of About Face? What are you going to say, Ramon?
No, yeah, around that time.
Yeah, so it was awesome meeting him then as a board member. And even though he was so sick, I was like, what is with this guy? He's not feeling great, but has just been a great activist, mentor to a lot of people of us here in the anti-war community. And I'm so excited to have you on with us here today, Ramon. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Thanks. No, I appreciate y'all having me on. So again, my name is Ramon Mejia. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm the anti-militarism national organizer with Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. And I came to About Face in 2011, I would say. 2012 is when I joined the organization. I'm a Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. So when I found an organization that aligned with my values of wanting to oppose the wars, and as Shauna was mentioning, the first time that I heard of militarism was through About Face, Veterans Against the War, right? They introduced me to what militarism was. And so then now in my role at GGJ as Anti-Militarism National Organizer, GGJ is an alliance of 60 member grassroots organizations throughout the country. We're a cross-issue, frontline, internationalist, and unapologetically left alliance. And so my role at GGJ is to help contribute an analysis to the relationship between militarism and the extractive economy, and kind of to deepen that consciousness within our members, to critically struggle against U.S. militarism in its various forms. So we have the demilitarized working group that clarifies our strategic goals and identifies the challenges and opportunities that we can help to build a stronger movement against militarism and towards transformative justice. I'm glad to be here with you all on April 4th. Is also the anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Beyond Vietnam speech, where he said that, quote, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death," end quote. And with a proposed military budget of $813 billion, it's all more important to continue listening to his words and hearing his advice.
Thanks, Ramon. Yeah, we're so glad to have you. And I wanted to ask you, is GGJ the only thing they work against is militarism, or?
No, yeah. So GGJ it has 4 programs. So within GGJ, we have the membership has voted on to moving for 4 programs. So we have the anti-militarism program. We also have grassroots feminisms, and then we also have global well-being, and then internationalism, right? Movement building. So yeah, those are the programs that we have at GGJ.
Okay, well, great. And I know that you were at COP26 recently, right, on the militarism, as an anti-militarism, but COP26 is not like a defense contractor conference. It's where all the nations get together and talk about the environment. So why were you there as a militarism organizer?
Yeah, so the Conference of the Parties, COP26, happened in Glasgow, Scotland in November. And, we, GGJ, along with a delegation, It Takes Roots of frontline organizations, Indigenous Environmental Network, Climate Justice Alliance, Just Transition Alliance, Jobs with Justice, comprising this delegation of It Takes Roots. We led essentially was over 60 plus member delegation. And it came at a historic moment when the climate crisis continues to touch all of our lives. That's the reason that I participated in it, simply through my role at GGJ. But it was important to be at this conversation and at COP26 because military emissions are excluded from climate conversations, right? From climate negotiations. And so with the military being the #1 polluter, killer, colonizer in the planet, then it's important that we have a genuine, honest conversation about the impacts of climate change and the fact that the military is the #1 consumer of fossil fuels, and subsequently the #1 emitter of fossil fuels, or of emissions, right? Of those chemicals most contributing to the climate crisis. And so then, one of our roles as a delegation was to kind of put front and center this conversation about how military impacts all our lives, and how it impacts our ecosystem, and how it impacts the climate. But we wanted to make sure that the conversation wasn't only on emissions, that we needed to address the way that the military impacts air, water, land, life, right? The way it impacts all of us. So that's one of the kind of things that we wanted to go, was to make sure that we wanted to speak about how the military impacts the climate. War and preparation for it are the most fossil fuel consuming activities on the planet. There's over 750 military bases around the world in 70 countries and territories. And beyond the issues of related to sovereignty, these continued occupations are the main source of pollution, or are one of the main sources of pollution within these nations in the global south. Domestic and overseas military installations account for about 40% of the DoD's greenhouse gases emissions. For example, just like one military jet or plane, the B-52 consumes just as much fuel in an hour as the average car driver uses in 7 years. So when the United States, National Priorities Project recently pointed out, like, it's important that we continue to push on this conversation around militarism and the impact on the climate, because you have the latest federal budget deal spends about $1 billion per year on international climate aid versus $2 billion per day on the U.S. military budget, right? This U.S. military budget that continues to increase, continues to grow, is going to impact all of us, not only through direct wars and conflict, but the ramifications and the after effects that war has on people and on the environment, whether it be in Iraq, whether it be in Afghanistan, whether it be in Ukraine, wherever war is being waged, then one of the silent kind of victims of war is the climate and the environment.
So you just dropped a lot of knowledge. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions about, those 715 military installations around the world. Not all of them are active, right? Some of them are defunct and are just full of chemicals and haven't really been cleaned up, right? Nuclear testing, fuel tankers. Think of the Red Hill disaster that's happening on Oahu in Hawaii, right? Is there any plan for the military to clean up the old bases or the installations?
I mean, you have essentially rusting barrels and chemicals and solvents and millions of rounds of ammunition that have been criminally abandoned by the Pentagon. I mean, we can look back to essentially since Vietnam, right? Since almost 50 years since the Vietnam War, and Agent Orange, the contamination that Agent Orange has had on the population continues to destroy families, continues, resulting in severe birth defects and cancers into the third generation, fourth generation, have been continued to be impacted. In Iraq, researchers studying about the impact that the U.S. military sieges on the city of Fallujah had said that the subsequent health crisis represented the highest rate of genetic damage in any population ever studied. Nuclear weapons testings throughout the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, all the way to the South Pacific Islands, has contaminated millions of acres of land and water with radiation and uranium. I mean, what's clear is that the number one polluter in this world is not the key to the climate solution, right? The military is a false solution. So with that being said, is that we have to begin to divert our funds from the military and invest in our communities, invest in not retooling military bases, right? Because with the climate crisis that's happening right now, there's now this funding that wants to go into the military, in the sense that I think it was $2 $2 billion or even more. It might be $1 trillion. I don't recall.
Okay.
It was 2 billion. But like all these is being invested into retooling military bases that are vulnerable to climate change, vulnerable to fires, vulnerable to flooding. They're going to retool these bases in order to make sure that they're able to withstand the climate. So rather than investing all this money into retooling bases, they need to be investing the money into closing these bases, into remediating the land, right? Cleaning up the land that has been destroyed, and be able to convert the land into community uses that are going to be fruitful and useful for the community. That's what
a lot of people
I'm spending on.
I mean, if you were in the military, it wasn't until I got in. I mean, I grew up on military bases, but it wasn't until I got in that I realized how many installations are Superfund sites that need to be cleaned up. And rather than cleaning these things up, they're just going to protect against the next climate threat, all the while adding to the climate problem of extracting resources and putting it out into the atmosphere, when really we need to reduce the military overall and clean up a lot of these Superfund sites. Because a lot of times people think about the military in terms of its consumption, but they don't think about, like, okay, the military has been consuming natural resources asymmetrically to everything else, the U.S. military, for a long time. So there's a long history of pollution that needs to get cleaned up in addition to the current consumption and things that they're doing. So do you think that, veterans have a place to talk about climate justice from their vantage point in being in the military?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, I think the fact that that a majority of military bases are also Superfund sites, or that the majority of former military bases are also Superfund sites. I think veterans have a huge role to play in how their employer essentially has an impact on the ecosystems and on the climate. I was just reading a story recently. I can't remember the base off the top of my head, but AP did an investigation of where Army base, where soldiers are starting to come forward about contaminated, drinking contaminated water, and the cancers that have been possibly connected to them consuming the water. And you hear about Camp Lejeune. There was also an issue there about water. You're seeing it on Oahu now. You're seeing it the way that one of our members, Southwest Organizing Project in Albuquerque, New Mexico, they're dealing with a jet fuel spill that has lasted decades, right? That leached onto their aquifer that provides water to the largest urban center in the state. And a lot of these bases, a lot of the not only the bases that a lot of active duty live at, but a lot of people that end up becoming veterans and after they leave the military, many of them end up residing near military bases, and the pollution that those military bases continues to wage on their communities. So it's important that veterans get involved to address the way that the military is unconcerned with the way it impacts veterans, and also just the fact that the water, we all drink water, we all breathe the same air. So it's important that every person in society, from veteran to non-veteran, is engaged in this conversation.
Thanks, Ramon. I was just wondering, is it really effective to focus on the military at all when you're talking about climate justice stuff? Like, I mean, we need the military to protect us, right? So what does a climate campaign that's focused on the military or militarism look like? Like, what are you asking for?
I guess yes, it is the right conversation to have, right? Like it is important to focus on the military in this climate conversation, because war fans the flames for climate change, and the fact that there isn't real discussions of holding the military accountable, that means that we're not meaningfully addressing the devastation caused by the military and one of the top contributors towards the climate crisis, right? Again, like I was saying, like instead of pouring resources into to building this war machine, we should be pouring resources into our communities, into healthcare and education, into housing, right? All the fundamental elements that are needed in order to have thriving communities. So how does that look like as far as holding the military accountable for its impact on climate change? Is to start kind of thinking about, engaging, on one hand, engaging fellow community members in how the military essentially and defense contractors, over 50% of the budget, is going to defense contractors. So they're all the resources that would be going to them or aren't going to them. So it's important to kind of engage our fellow community members around this conversation. It's also important to engage politicians who subsequently, like that, a lot of the, a good number, I think in the dozens, have money invested in weapons manufacturers, right? So they're benefiting financially from investing in stock that makes profit from war. So you have these same Congress people that not only have invested stock in weapons manufacturers, but they're also voting and deciding when to wage war, and also what contracts are being used in their state and their districts, right? So it's important that we engage them in that way. So one way that GGJ is kind of engaging in the moment of seeing like how can we continue to expand this conversation around militarism and climate change is through the No War, No Warming Pledge, essentially engaging politicians that have signed on to the Green New Deal resolution, but then have also been speaking to the impact of military on climate change, but then seeing as the solution is to essentially decarbonize the military, the greening of the military, which is also a false solution, because you can't green the violence and destruction that the military wages on people and on ecosystems, right? An institution that's willingly and openly able to obliterate land, air, and sea and people aren't going to be the solution to climate change, right? So engaging politicians.
Yeah, like coming up with biodegradable bullets. Yeah. That's not really going to solve the problem when it comes to pollution in the military, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, it's like you see it. I remember seeing, like, there was a photo where it's like you have a solar panel, like artillery, howitzers that are connected to solar panel, like essentially, trying to make it less, emission, but yet the bombs and the artillery pieces that are landing on people and on communities are going to not only killing people, but then contaminating the soil as well, right? So through this No War, No Warming pledges, it's about cleaning up and remediating and transition to military bases, right? So these 790 military bases, let's start closing them down. Let's start to clean up and remediate, and then transition those base sites into alternative, healthy, and resilient community uses, right? It's about reallocating funds from institutions that propagate harm, and it's about investing in community resources, right? It's about ending weapons manufacturing and distribution and war profiteering, and essentially creating policy that bans weapons manufacturing and the production of repurposing military equipment and stuff. So that's how kind of we're trying to engage in that way.
Yeah, that's a great. Thank you for sharing that. I know we are dropping the link to the pledge in the chat. If you are on YouTube, Facebook, you should see that link. I believe if you're on Twitter, you can visit us on our YouTube or Facebook thread for that link, and it's also populated here at the bottom of the screen. Thanks for
I apologize. Let me just to make sure to clarify. So one thing that GGJ is working on is on the War No Warming Pledge, and we're going to be kind of engaging that process more. But the the pledge that's in the chat, the no greenwashing pledge, that's essentially what it is the environmental justice has no borders pledge. It's a commitment to boycott propaganda trips to apartheid Israel, right? So it's a pledge of coalition that has come together, that put out this pledge on they released it on Land Day, was a day marking Palestinian protest against violent Israeli removal of their lands, and comes after in the aftermath of an incident that essentially highlighted the dangerous persistence of and support of colonialism in the environmental justice movement. So essentially, this pledge we're engaging with policy, advocacy, and grassroots organizations to essentially to fight for environmental justice, that it has no borders, right? Ensuring the survival of land and people anywhere. It requires that we oppose settler colonialism, militarism, land theft, and environmental destruction everywhere. So definitely, yeah, hope everybody can also sign on to the no greenwashing pledge, and we'll be sharing more about the no war, no warming pledge, and how folks can support in that effort as weeks and months ahead.
Thanks for mentioning all of this, Ramon. And I think it's critically important to when we're talking to our neighbors and, folks at the grassroots level about how to address this thing in terms of climate, in terms of water, in terms of local contamination, if there's a suspicion of that. I can tell you that from some of my experience in the Defense Logistics Agency, there are, I'll give one example, casting and forging plants that are, embedded in neighborhoods in Roanoke, Virginia, literally on the block in Baltimore. And you see these things happening, and a lot of times there's a military or, large corporation, propaganda, statement in terms of we're prioritizing safety, right? We're, ensuring that, the work that we're doing here, though they contain contaminants, aren't, contaminating your water supply. However, we know better. I'm curious if you can give, a couple nuggets, a couple of, things that folks can sort of think about as they're organizing their community locally here across the US, around the implications locally in the community.
I'm sorry. So the question was how can folks engage in their local community?
Building power, organizing, pushing back on that narrative that, again, sounds good. However, we know may have a local impact to, safety, climate, safety of drinking water, and the lands, et cetera.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think it's important. So the one thing one thing that we've been able to do is that we have, as it connects to militarism, as it connects to climate change, is that we've been able to put the people's orientation of the regenerative economy essentially is a toolkit that provides over 80 policy ideas and solutions that are presented in essentially 15 planks. It's essentially a strategy to kind of being able to move these forwards, right? So one way that we look at it is that the solutions, they must protect, not harm our communities, right? The solution must repair the harms of the extractive economy. The solutions must move non-extractive and equitable investments to our communities and to workers, and solutions must provide a foundation to transform relationships and structures so that they're rooted in respect, equity, and justice, right? So I think when you find like-minded people within your community, that's how you build power, right? Continue to have conversations, continue to group together. It could be from your neighborhood association, it could be at your community center, it could be at your library. There might not be, organizations in your community, right? So it takes a person essentially just to engage in that effort, right? To try and engage in dialogue, and then it depends on how you want to engage in the conversation. So for when it comes to war and it comes to militarism, for a lot of the generation, like for my son, I think about my son or my kids, like war hasn't directly impacted. It hasn't been the main impacting factor in their life, right? The way it has a lot of other generations and a lot of other people, right? So it's about trying to find the on-ramp for folks that haven't engaged around militarism or don't have a primary kind of focus, is seeing like where the on-ramp is, right? So for example, whether it be with the immigrant rights movement, you have ICE and Border Patrol and the continuing to militarization of our borders, right? And the surveillance and the way that apparatus continues to kind of impact our communities. It takes, even just like the continuing militarization of the police, right? The military budget and the police budgets kind of they reflect one another, as nationally as the federal budget continues to, that pie continues to get bigger and bigger for militarism and militarization, military budget. So does at the city level, right? That budget continues to move more towards policing, right? So we need to not be putting all our efforts into continuing to build, huge militaries and huge police forces, right? We have to like invest in those the communities and in the issues that we kind of and the resources that we really need in our community: good streets, good infrastructure, good housing, healthcare, education, good, accessible food, right? A lot of our communities have food deserts, right? And the fact that the the highest budget in the military is not able to provide for food and housing for a lot of our people, then that just shows that, where our morals and our values lie.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying here that, your kid has grown up without war, but not in the way like Vietnam and not in the way like World War II, because at that time, like World War II, 50% of the population drafted, 25% of the population drafted for Vietnam, but yet we are spending way more money than we ever spent in World War II on the military. So I would say, war is affecting our kids more, but it's like more than we know, because it's being privatized into a mercenary society. It's just not like on Front Street like it used to be, to a publicly owned and accountable military actions anymore. So that's my point of view on it. Like where we're just now it's only 1% of the population that's in the military, and so we're thinking, oh, we're not really at war. That's how we're able to be constantly at war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my reflection on that is Dr. King talked about that in the same speech, that we're inviting friends and comrades to go out and reflect, or at least re-listen to his words. We are at this point, and I think we have been for quite a while, around what is the conscious layout and fabric of our nation, who's been at war for so long that we also don't acknowledge and call it out in the same ways that we used to, that it used to shock the conscience that we spent dollars in previous decades and generations. But here we are now facing a grossly bloated budget in ways that we also look at it as, a way of life, a new way of life. And so that's a good point to bring up. I'm curious, Ramon, in the work that you all that you're seeing and that you all are building around, how does the Army Corps engineers relate to all of this? Since they're involved in, sort of the civilian facing projects, we've seen this as an organization, as our members, mobilized to Standing Rock. and also here in the last 6 months to Line 3. I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to what your understanding of the Army Corps of Engineers role.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak too much as far as like the I don't have like a direct knowledge on every like kind of aspect of the Army Corps of Engineers, but definitely they're right there in line with fossil fuel industry, essentially trying to continue to extract you know gas and oil and whatnot from a lot of our communities and a lot of indigenous communities. So what you're seeing is you have like the state and private industries that are essentially they're utilizing their wealth and their money and their power in order to kind of to not only exploit local communities, but then also essentially pay and pay for private industry for private kind of essentially mercenaries, private paramilitaries, essentially to kind of harass and kind of surveil and continue to wage violence on community members that are opposed to pipeline projects, that are opposed to extractive industry continuing to tear up their land and kind of poison the water and the food sources for their communities. So yeah, that's essentially, you have private and state entities that are working together in order to continue to destroy our communities. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. No matter who's, in the White House and in the House, right? So thank you so much for lifting that up. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Ramon, for being here in this space with us today. I'm curious if let's move to some final and wrap up comments. Shauna, I'd love to hear from you, and then Ramon, and then we'll move to close and invite everyone again to engage with us in the chat for follow-up comments and reflections there. Shauna?
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm so glad that you came on today, Ramon. I don't know if you noticed behind me what I have going on, the Defending the Dignity of Our Bodies, Our Communities, Mother Earth, World March of Women and Grassroots Global Justice. The It Takes Roots to Weather the Storm, System Change, Not Climate Change. I got this from COP21. Over here, this Water is Life from Standing Rock, Miniwachoni. I love grassroots global justice because I think, it's so many frontline organizations who are directly experiencing militarism and climate change, and how the analysis, they really taught me the analysis of we got to move to a regenerative economy. We cannot continue to have the extractive economy because, like you were saying, as veterans, we're on Superfund sites and we get, we are directly affected by the pollution, but the wars we're also fighting is based on an exploitative economy. Our military controls something. Garrett Reppenhagen told me once, he's the director of BFP. He told me 80% of the shipping lanes. Now imagine how much war would we have to do, or how much control, how many bases, how many military installations would we need if we actually had a regenerative economy where people are just developing their own sources of energy, right? Then it would be natural to cut the military budget. And I wonder if that's why it's been so dang hard to transition our society from an extractive, exploitative economy to a regenerative economy, because we had that cost of war person from Brown University on last week. There's 700 lobbyists. There's 2 lobbyists for war for every person that is supposed to be representing us. And they're well, if we move to a regenerative economy, we're not going to be able to, we have all these guns that we keep on producing all these times. So that's really what we need to do, and extract every last drop, right? And so that's why I appreciate GGJ being no, we can move to a regenerative economy. We can invest in our future. We can put more money into the economy, and we don't have to go to war with people about oil or resources anymore, and make a just transition. So really appreciate that Grassroots Global Justice is coming out with this no war, no warming. I think that's really the right way we got to go. And Ramon, I'm so glad that you're organizing, doing the work. It's really great to have you.
Thanks, Shauna. Ramon, some final and wrap up comments. What's on your mind?
Yeah. So I just kind of want to say that, you know, that we have to find a way that it's that this conversation that we're having, every conversation that we're having, in order to try to kind of create a better world, right? It's about trying to find a way to be in right relationship with people and planet, right? It's about how to identifying what our role is within the belly of the beast, right? And what does it mean to be an international solidarity and cooperation, right? To be able to engage in collective um, uh, repertory kind of around foreign policy, right? But essentially, it's about centering principles of collective care, of reparations, of right relationship with people and planet, and finding accountability, right? The military is a false solution. There's nothing sustainable about warfare. And in order to mitigate, climate change, we must confront the elephant in the room, and that's U.S. military-backed growth and how it's used to underpin profit-driven extractive resource extraction. Right? There's at least 47 members of Congress and their spouses that have between $2 million and $6.7 million worth of stock in companies that are among the top 100 defense contractors. And they shouldn't be giving that money to defense contractors. They should be investing into the community, into our communities, right? So with that, I just hope that we continue to have these conversations to push elected officials and also to push our community members to continue to engage in this conversation.
Yeah, right on. The overwhelming majority of the, Pentagon budget goes to defense contractors. And so, a lot of times we hear, electeds, sort of, trying to attach the budget to military personnel. And the reality is that's just not where reality is. And so that is why our work around the Drop the Mic campaign is so critically important. Being in coalition with GGJ and the work that you are doing as well, Ramon, is so critically important. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I hope that for those who are on, who have been sticking with us through this conversation, we'll grab those links. We'll share this live. Invite your neighbors, your friends, your comrades, those in the movement to have deeper conversations, not just abroad, but we see here in the moment where our government had a really strong push against, moving just stimulus or support for people during this ongoing health pandemic, are able to move war funds or funds abroad very quickly, very swiftly. We ought to be having different conversations and organizing in ways that we can help shift those power structures, even those that are backed behind lobbyists and what have you. We, the people, vote. And we, the people, should continue to stay engaged in this space, particularly, and I say amid the pandemic, because I think this is one of the contradictions that really should, help us rise to a moment where we understand that it is unconscionable to see a growing Pentagon budget in excess of $800 billion while we see our neighbors, our friends, and our family struggle in the ways that we are seeing. So thank you so much, Ramon, for being on with us. The engagement, that you and Shauna had in some of those questions and your responses were just super on point. Engage and, really want to invite the community to stick with us. This is what we're hoping to unpack each Monday, to have folks who are doing this work, who can speak to what does it look like at the grassroots level to have these conversations. So thank you so much for joining us, Ramon. We'll be back next week for another Engage and Drop the Mic Monday. Hope that you will stick with us, engage with us, and build power with us. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be back next week at 2 p.m. Eastern here across About Face social media. Have a great day. Be well, everyone.